So we all know that Yoshikage Kira is a man who enjoys himself a good old sandwich. However, a lesser known fact is that after, Kira and his lady friend enjoy subscribing to the NewWorldReview for regular JoJo content uploaded straight into their YouTube feeds. And given how many partners Kira tends to have, this means that he needs to subscribe an awful lot of people. So thank you, Kira, I think. Hello and welcome to the NewWorldReview, your source for everything anime and manga. And today I would like to dive back into the realm of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in order to discuss a figure whom I believe is not only one of the greatest antagonists in the entire series, but quite possibly storytelling in general. And you know, it's really interesting when you examine JoJo villains and come back to ask yourself the question of, well, who's the best and why? Because there are a slew of really iconic figures to choose from. Could the greatest antagonist be in the form of a super vampire body thief who can stop time? Or how about a figure literally referred to as the ultimate life form? Then again, perhaps it's quite possibly the single most powerful figure in the series who literally reshaped an entire universe. Or maybe even a certain Mr. President. Well, in my opinion, it is none of them. And for all of their glorious displays of power and intent, I'm afraid that the most effective, sinister, and intriguing antagonist spawns from a human who wanted nothing more than to live a quiet life, unbothered by the world at large. That is the goal of one Yoshikage Kira, and his journey is nothing less than morbidly captivating. Although it only forms a portion of this character, who is unique even for a series known almost exclusively for unique individuals. But I want to begin this discussion right there, with the fact that Kira, when it boils down to it, is simply just a guy. Very much a realistic depiction of a serial killer actually, because when these people are caught in reality, the story behind them is often exceedingly normal and even boring. You know, they tend to have families, stable jobs, and a lot of times are even actively involved in their community. Whereas the large majority of media portrayals of serial killers more like individuals who live in dank rooms, licking knives, and endlessly fantasizing about their next kill. It's a strange evil for the sake of evil stereotype, and I'm sure that there are serial killers like that, maybe. But JoJo at large has a horrible habit of falling into poor stereotypes with villains. The most well-known antagonist, Dio, can be boxed in like this because he has a bit of a flat existence to me, because he's just a profound jerk for no real reason, and because of that, my expectations of him were always quite low. Whenever he shows up, I know that he's going to do something shocking for the sake of shocking, with no deeper character motivation behind any move he performs. So I wait for his dickish maneuver to happen, and then we move on. However, Kira is the kind of character that you can never have any form of solid expectation. The majority of his actions are performed with one clear goal in mind: settle this as quickly as possible and return to a state of normalcy. He will almost never commit an unnecessary action. So we don't get a lot of evil for the sake of evil stuff from him, you know, like killing a cat while freezing time, which means that when Kira does act, it is always much more dramatically potent, because if he's put in a situation where he needs to do anything at all, it is automatically a desperate one. And this gives him a lot of room for exploration as a character, as opposed to most of the antagonists in the series, because we tend to focus more on Kira's minute actions and subtlety of mind, and we are being consistently kept on the edge of our seats, wondering if and when Kira will be pushed to a state of invoking his power at all. And I don't think I can really overstate just how effective this is in crafting a villain, because if you look at other JoJo examples, and let's use someone who isn't Dio, let's say Kaz this time. He is an accepted evil who has no restrictions on his actions, with an eventual goal of world domination. And as a result of that, we are not paying attention to his subtlety, because every time he appears, he needs to do something grand just to make him the baseline of an interesting character. And even after going so far as to become the ultimate life form, I'm still not so sure that I would ever easily accuse Kaz of being interesting. And that's because Yoshikage Kira is capable of generating more drama from a mix-up of sandwich bags than Kaz is by presenting an apocalyptic scale threat to the planet. There's just something so incredibly absurd about the idea that Kaz, by virtue of his characterization, has to work so much harder to have any impact, as opposed to Kira, who every moment he spends on screen or page is simply gripping. And a lot of that might primarily be because the problems Kira faces are fascinatingly mundane and far more identifiable as a result. Because putting aside the whole serial killer with a dismembered hand fetish, I'm sure that most of us can probably empathize with Kira to some degree, especially the introverts amongst us, who face the daily challenge of just trying to keep life as quiet and as in control as possible, while still of course pursuing what makes us happy, whatever hobby that may be. Kira just so happens to be a twisted personification of that, but it doesn't make his struggles any less identifiable. If anything, it makes him uncomfortably relatable and capable of generating both disgust and an element of sympathy or empathy. And that's a very conflicting set of feelings to deal with, which can mean that whenever Kira appears, we'll be paying just that little bit more attention because we are constantly constantly in search of new information to properly make up our minds about this character. And there are very few JoJo antagonists that I would say I feel similarly about. In comparison, my mind was more than made up about Dio, Kaz, and Rico, and Diavolo within mere minutes or even during their proper introductions. And a lot of this comes down to a very simple core idea of what makes a good villain, which is that Yoshikage Kira actually believes that he is the protagonist of his own story. He will murder without a second thought, still complete identities and families, and still believe that what he has done is a perfectly acceptable action, albeit not socially acceptable. And yeah, I guess you could make the argument that people like Dio see themselves as the protagonist of their own story, but the difference is Dio knows for a fact that what he is doing is wrong. He's too cartoonishly evil not to understand that. And in his case, it's more that he embraces the evil within him, and that is the source of his charm. Whereas Kira's charm is that he believes his evil to be regular mundane behavior. And with this unique positioning, Araki elects to take maximum advantage of Kira in a way that he had not done before and arguably has not done since. Because we spent quite a lot of time during Diamond is Unbreakable following the story of Kira. And in a weird way, he becomes something of a protagonist during the second half of the series, and one particular experience that comes to mind is where he even has his own arc handling Stray Cat. This is like 6 whole chapters in the Part 4 manga, which doesn't even feature any of our actual protagonists. And that's a pretty big thing to be capable of as an antagonist. Because yeah, most of them get a handful of chapters here and there focusing on them, but with Kira, it honestly gets to the point where we start zeroing in on him more so than Josuke, or actually any protagonist, which is such a departure from what JoJo usually is, which likes to keep the main villain in the background until the designated time of battle. And speaking of, in keeping with Kira's kind of normalcy as a character, his final battle certainly does fall short of JoJo's more epic expectations. It really is more of an intimate affair, where Josuke just stumbles upon him in the street and things cascade into chaos and defeat from there. The fight itself is not anything that I would come close to calling a spectacle, and it is fought and won almost entirely in the mental arena, pitting Kira against Josuke in a war of ideas and quick thinking. And Kira doesn't have a particularly epic death either, having been accidentally run over by an ambulance intended to save his life. But at the same time, it's all just so appropriate and satisfying of an ending for such a character. He doesn't need to stop time, warp the universe, or present the pinnacle of power, and so he doesn't really need to be defeated in such a fashion either. And with that said, his ultimate, more eternal fate is exceptionally satisfying, with his last interaction being with the ghost of a girl that he had previously killed, and then being dragged into God knows where by Kira's favorite item in the world, being hands. And I don't think I've ever felt more content with the defeat of a JoJo villain than I have here. Or perhaps in fact, villains in general. Kira's final moments here is one of the most memorable antagonistic endings that I feel like I've ever experienced. And at this point, I do want to note that rather ashamedly, I have not yet read Deadman's Questions, so I'm not quite sure how his story continues from here. However, for the sake of this discussion, I think it's unimportant, because Kira does not need extended media to solidify his presence in this universe. And something I haven't spoken about yet would be his stand, Killer Queen, and how this makes Kira infinitely more interesting, because it would seem that its effect operates in such a stark contrast to everything it is that Kira strives for. Kira is a quiet, clean, and unassuming man, yet his stand power is mostly about creating messy destruction. So it creates an even bigger conflict of interest, leading to maximum drama. Because Kira can't really invoke the stand without making something of a scene, so he has to use it very selectively and precisely, with the slightest lapse in judgment resulting in a situation that can get very quickly out of hand. Pun intended. Like the whole situation with Jotaro and Koichi. And it's really cool to see a stand like this in the hands of a person who will arguably never use it to its full potential. Obviously, bites the dust aside, because that's a pretty insane invocation. However, what I'm trying to say is that if Killer Queen were under the control of most other villainous presences, then they would probably use it to cripple the world. But at the same time, I also feel like it would be used far more boringly than Kira's more creative and selective invocations. But one of the points I'd like to end on regarding Kira is that he also isn't necessarily presented to us as an irredeemable character. And I do wonder how his story would have turned out if Hayato didn't exist. And I wonder this because this is really kind of a sickening situation, but after assuming the identity of Kosaku Kawajiri, it actually brings a massive degree of happiness to the life of Shinobu. And Kira begins expressing, dare I say it, concern for his new wife's safety. And this even confused Kira himself, who tried to rationalize it as simply not wanting an event to occur that would put undue focus on him. But there is no doubt in my mind that while small, a seed was planted that probably would have eventually gone on to irrevocably change Kira. And look, redemption is probably too strong of a word, because his actions in life thus far were nothing short of putrid, self-serving, and cruel, but he was undeniably evolving. And maybe had this gone on, Kira doesn't evolve into a good person who loves his wife and stops murdering women for their hands, but he would have changed in some way. Or maybe he reaches an impasse where he is forced to make the decision to kill Shinobu because his feelings for her are compromising who he is. And come on, we all know that those hands of his get mighty jealous. But the point is that even right up until until the end of his tenure, Kira is presented with options and potential. Lots of potential. So much so that I could not help but want to follow his story like it was an addictive soap opera. Which is not only a greater endorsement of him than most, if not all of the other JoJo antagonists, but also the majority of the protagonists as well. Very few of our JoJo's are as well explored as Yoshikage Kira. You could even make the argument that none of them are, although that's a very different topic. But the fact that Kira can even stand in their league is nothing short of phenomenal for a guy who just wants to live quietly in a small pocket of his own private space. So in my opinion, Yoshikage Kira is a masterclass of character development and implementation, and nothing short of an absolute highlight of JoJo's bizarre adventure. But that pretty much does it for this discussion on Yoshikage Kira. If you enjoyed this video and the content this channel produces in general, then please do consider donating to the New World Review Patreon, because the support of all of you amazing people is what continues to make this channel possible. And if Patreon isn't quite your style, then please do leave this video a like, share, or subscribe, because it also helps support this channel an incredible amount. And if you'd like to join the fun at any time, then please do head over to my Discord server, where a wide array of shenaniganry takes place on a daily basis. And finally, please do comment with your thoughts on Yoshikage Kira. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.